Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 81 of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. Before we get to today's show, a quick reminder that my Teaching Yoga to Beginners virtual course is now live. You can find all details at mindfulyogateachers.com/beginners YTT. That's mindfulyogateachers.com/beginners YTT. And if you're looking to really understand how to teach beginners yoga effectively and skillfully, then make sure you check this one out. I will be dropping more details in the weeks ahead. But on the show today, I have Savira Gupta, who's back. Now, Savira Gupta is no stranger to the show. If you've been a long-time listener, you know she's been on this podcast many times before, and she's back again. And we're talking about Sanatana Dharma. Okay, we explore what is Sanatana Dharma, how is Sanatana Dharma related to Hinduism? Do you become a Hindu by birth, or can you, I'm doing air quotes, I know you can't see me, do you convert to Hinduism? And how does this relate to yoga as you and I practice and do this? We also talk about what is largely misunderstood about Sanatana Dharma and Hinduism in the yoga world. Savira lays out, she explains what is dharma and then lays out the different types of dharma that are there in Sanatana Dharma, and gives us advice on how to navigate the sea of information that is available when you look online for Sanatana Dharma. Okay. And we explore this conversation almost like think of it as a beginner's view to Sanatana Dharma, because there is just so much to explore in here. And Savira lays this out in a really clear, concise, and relatable way. I hope you find this conversation enriching. As always, you can find everything that's mentioned in the show at our show notes, which are available at letstalk.yoga/listen. I'll also link to Savira and where you can connect with her, where you can read her blogs and see a little more of her work. Okay. I'll see you on the other side. Enjoy this conversation about Sanatana Dharma with Savira Gupta. Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a 6-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. Hi, Savira. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Arundhati. How are you? And thank you for having me back.
I'm good. I'm so glad that we are doing this again. I feel like it's been quite a while. I know you've been traveling and stuff. So welcome back to the show. And it's good to see you back on Instagram and doing everything that you're always doing.
Thank you.
So you and I are going to talk about Sanatana Dharma. Okay. And Savira, like we were talking like a moment ago before we started recording, the listeners may or may not even have any idea about what is Sanatana Dharma. So should we start there? As in, what is Sanatana Dharma and how does it relate to yoga?
Okay, so I like to, before we start on a subject this vast, just to sort of let your listeners know that I'm giving them a perspective from my side as to how I have lived it, understood it, learned it, and can relate to it. Sanatana Dharma is a vast subject. And what I'd like to offer your listeners is to break it down to the most fundamental, foundational explanation for them to understand. And then further, they can build upon that in their own time and at their own pace. So Sanatana Dharma is the original term used to represent or to reflect what modern day now calls it as Hinduism. So for that, we need to go back. First of all, it is the oldest living culture. Till today, it's the third largest religion. And we need to go back to the date during the time when the Indus Saraswati civilization. So people living along those Saraswati and the Indus River were known as Indu, I-N-D-U. But due to pronunciation over time, it became Hindu with a H-I-N-D-O-O. And that slowly changed as time evolved. It became Hindu, and in modern language, it's used as Hinduism, right? So it's a natural religion which includes a vast philosophy and practices. And its backbone is all about the knowledge of the Vedas, the Ramayanas, the Mahabharata, and the Bhagavad Gita. But to go a little more into it, it is also a way of life. So karma and rebirth, right? So we are determined by our actions. But more importantly, it is based on the relationship with nature, dharma. And dharma, a very misunderstood word in Western yoga land. Dharma has to do with nature, natural law, rita, which is the root word, or dri, which is the root word, to uphold, to sustain, to support. And our culture can be looked at as ritualistic. So we have certain sacred texts and rituals that we follow. And it can also be looked at as spiritualistic, which has to do with living in alignment with nature, standing on the side of dharma, and to do with humanity. So if we move a little further, you will notice that in India, because, look at all the states, the people, the language, the culture, the languages that are spoken, we have many deities, right? So some may say it's pluralistic because we have so many deities. Each individual can decide or choose a deity that they align with and follow certain rituals to support that devotion. But at the same time, we have groups like the Shaivism that only have one deity, which is Shiva, or Vaishnavism, which has Vishnu. But either or is supported. So there's no discrimination as to who you follow, which god you support to or pray to. But the ultimate goal, spiritual goal, is moksha. But there are many ways to achieve that or to attain that, right? So that's what I look at Hinduism. But I'd like to say something or read something from a writer called Subhai Moy Das. And he says, "It is clear that Hinduism includes a system of tradition and beliefs on spirituality, but unlike most religion, it has no clerical order, no principal religious authorities or administrative group, nor even any central holy book. Hindus are allowed to hold nearly any kind of belief in deities they choose, from monotheistic to polytheistic, from atheistic to humanistic. So while Hinduism has been defined as a religion, it may more appropriately be described as a way of life that includes any and all scholarly and spiritual practices that can be said to lead to enlightenment or human progress." So in a nutshell, that is what we would say Hinduism is. But the term Sanatana Dharma goes way back to the Vedic times. And I would say it's only in the late 19th century has it come back to life or to be revived. So Sanatana, which means eternal, and Dharma means duty. So you will notice that Sanatana Dharma involves every aspect of the community, right from certain cosmic order, that's nature, governance, which equals to law and justice, society, how do we create harmony and connectivity, and then there are the individual duties of a person. So in a simpler form, this is what Sanatana Dharma is.
You laid that out so clearly and so beautifully. I think also because it is in for lack of a better word, so broad in that definition that you read out, right? I think that's why there is so much confusion as well.
Yes.
At least and I look at it in the limited scope of the yoga world, right? That's why there is so much confusion. So can I ask you, do you become a Hindu by birth? Or can someone who practices yoga, can they also be a Hindu?
A very good question. And you'll probably get two answers from me. One is you are born into a Hindu family.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, you can become a Hindu by developing or connecting or applying those principles to your life. We don't believe in conversion at all. So you cannot convert to become a Hindu, but you can adopt a Hindu way of life. You can adopt the studying. You can adopt the practices. But I think it has to go even further. You've got to understand the cultural background of the whole culture. It's not easy because you'll have people from, let's say, the East or from the West who will have different ways of doing rituals from those from the North and the South. I would say India is so vast. It's so diverse. And that is the beauty of this culture or this way of living, is that we accept all. We don't condone any. We accept that you are entitled to follow a path that you feel in alignment with.
I'm so glad you clarified this, because you spoke about how it is about adopting the Hindu way. And it's not just that, steeping yourself in the culture and understanding it and living it. Because I want to make it really clear to anybody who's listening, just because we do a little bit of yoga doesn't mean you're practicing Hinduism.
Exactly.
I just want to call that out. And because we see people plucking parts of these things and making it, just tweaking it the way they want to for their own narratives. So just because you do some part of yoga, a little bit of yoga, doesn't mean you're a Hindu. And I just want to say that out loud in case somebody thinks they are now on their way to becoming a Hindu.
Yeah, because like I said, you cannot convert. We don't have any rituals where we can convert people. So you are born into a Hindu family. And I think that is one misconception. That is one view that people don't see within Western yoga land. And also, to break it down, simply by practicing yoga, which is just a darshana, which is part of 6 darshana, does not make you a Hindu.
Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, Savira, you can't just proclaim, maybe you can, I don't know. Let me ask you, you can't just call yourself a Hindu, right? Or do you have to be initiated in some way, or a guru, or how do you do it? Essentially, I don't know. It's a terrible question and the way I asked you, but I'm wondering if you...
I tried to research on that, whether there were ways that you could be initiated into it or you could call yourself a Hindu. And I literally couldn't find anything except that adopting the faith, in the sense, having complete faith in what the teachings are, right? Or adopting a way of life. You see, in part of Hinduism is dharma. Dharma is very important to us as a culture, as a community, as an individual. Standing on the side of a dharma is key for us. So every action that we have or that we do always has to be in alignment, not only within the individual's dharma or society or collective, but also the bigger picture, which is obviously nature. As Sanatana Dharma, we are very much in line with nature. We're so in line with nature that from a Western perspective, it's difficult to understand that. How can a culture revolve around the cosmic or the universe?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You gave me a very good segue here. So can we get into talking a little more about dharma? Because I feel like without that, this conversation won't be complete. So what is dharma?
Okay, let's start with the broader aspect. So that means the universe, the cosmic universe. How does the universe regulate the imbalances right? So you'll find natural destruction or you'll find man-made destruction taking place. Dharma is the rhythm or divine rhythm of universe, right? So it on its own regulates, she regulates her natural order, always taking care of the surrounding of the universe and whoever lives within the universe. Okay? Now, dharma, depending on the context and a word that we attach to dharma, will reflect something else. Now, if you look at Sanatana Dharma, it's the Hindu civilization, the people. How do we live in harmony and while supporting others around us? So then we break it down into 3 ways first. So first one is Vishesha Dharma. So Vishesha Dharma depends on a duty that we have, depending on the time, place, and skill set and stage of life. So, for example, if I'm talking to you right now, I'm talking to you as a yoga teacher. And if I have a baby who's crying, at that point in time, my role will change, right? Because who needs me more will be the baby who's crying. So my duty at this point is a mother. The baby is crying at this very moment. Where am I? I'm in the house, right? What is my skill set is to, as a mother, what are my skill set? Caring, looking after, taking care,
Nurturing,
all of that. And what stage of life am I in? I'm in the grahastha.
the householder. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So at that point, my duty is going to change. So I'm going to move away from my role of a yoga teacher talking to you to take care of the child that is crying. Okay. Now, the second one is called paradharma. So these are duties that are not aligned with our nature, or maybe duties that I may or may not need at this present moment. So I'll give you an example. If I want to be an actress, and no matter how hard I pursue this career, for me at this point in time, it's not going to work. So that means I'm going to have to give it up. I may follow it later on in my life, right? So that would be your paradharma.
Paradharma. Mm-hmm.
And then samanya dharma has to do with your ethical principles, right? Which are universal to every individual. Equate those to your yama and niyamas. So now let's come to Sanatana Dharma. How does a group or individuals live in harmony within the bigger picture? So you break it down into 2 kinds of dharma. One is ashrama dharma. This has to do with the different stages of life within the society, right? So that's brahmacharya, or brahma ashrama, that's your grihastha, that's vanprastha, and sannyas. And each of those stages have certain actions or duties that we need to follow. So someone in the brahmacharya stage, they're all about learning, exploring, nurturing themselves, taking care of themselves, making sure that they have the tools to able to support them for the next stage of life. So we move through these different stages. And as we move through these different stages, our duty towards the stage we're in, towards the society, and towards the bigger picture will change, will vary. Now break it down to varna dharma. These are based on skill sets, very much depending on our gunas. They reflect our skill sets. So some people are more inclined to become professors and teachers, or some are more inclined to become artists, singers, actors. So again, your duty is, how do you find harmony within that community, within that group, within the bigger picture of society and dharma? And then each individual, we always figure out, we're always asking ourselves, what is my purpose? And that's where the purusharthas come in. In the purusharthas, you have 4 goals, which is your dharma, kama, artha, and moksha. It's very important to understand then here, dharma means again, duties and actions as an individual. that will allow us to sort of support us in order to achieve our karma, our artha, and moksha. But again, depending on the skill set, depending on the stage you're in, will also vary. And last of all is your swadharma. That is the dharma of an individual. So my duty, my actions towards myself, towards my family, towards my society, the bigger picture, always standing on the side of dharma, righteous action. So that's how you would break down dharma. Many people can confuse dharma as passion, which it's not.
No. Mm-hmm.
Right? So, that's in a gist what dharma is.
It's beautifully explained. And there's a lot there. It's just that answer. I feel like listeners will have to go back and listen to it a couple of times because you laid out so many parts there. I think one of the things that often gets lost is a lot of what we do as Hindus, right? It's never about I, me, myself. We're not in isolation. It's always I, me, myself, and you. And it's always me and the community, me and society, or whatever we call it. But I feel like at least in the Western world up here, at least in America, it's very egocentric. It's very I, me, my stuff. And we don't relate to community, society the same way, at least that we as Hindus do. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, it does. I mean, when I was living in India, why does joint family come into it? There comes living with yourself as a single person within your family, then living as a married couple within the joint family, married couple with kids within the bigger picture, right? So it just grows. That society just keeps growing. And it teaches you how to be fluid, how to give and take, how to listen,
yes.
How to exchange views, how to accept views, and that there is no one way, right? Even within the same household, you can have someone who will follow a different path to moksha and someone else who may follow the path of knowledge towards moksha.
So true. Mm-hmm.
But it's accepting. We accept that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. True. It's very tolerant of the other person. It's like sometimes when and I see this at the studio a lot, sometimes people will be like, oh, my mother is visiting, my father is visiting, or mother-in-law is visiting. And sometimes people will be like, oh, for how long? And if it's more than 2 weeks, they'll be like, oh my gosh, that's so long. Yeah. And we'd be like, no, it's not. It's very normal to have people stay with you for 2 months. And it just makes me laugh each time because it's such a simple example, but it shows that we're used to living in isolation out here. And not many cultures do that.
No. You see, the thing, what I found is you have a culture that has no idea of how we live in India, let's say, and now all of a sudden have decided to practice yoga. But what is happening is that it's plucked what it can relate to, and it's expanded on that. And you've left everything else out that gives more meaning, more depth to the practice. So why don't we like it when our feet touches the paper? There's an explanation for that, because even that piece of paper, as we say, is divine. Mm-hmm. It's through paper also that we get, we write our information, our
knowledge. Yeah.
Right. But if you break down paper even more, what is it? It's part of the earth. It's part of nature. If that is part of nature, I'm part of nature. So there is that link or not. And that is what is missing within the Western yoga industry.
Mm-hmm. Also, this quality of just reverence, right? Reverence for us is not only towards, say, God or something like that. Reverence is towards, like you said, a paper, a book, could be towards an elderly person you meet.
Yeah.
So there is this quality of just this inherent nature of just being reverent to everything. So you were talking about dharma, right? And you broke down dharma. So are there different types of dharma, and is that something you already answered, or is there more?
One can go into a little more in Varna Dharma, which will bring us in again, especially Varna Dharma. And I purposely chose the word skill set because Varna can also mean Varna and Jati, and that requires its own topic because it relates to the four systems or the four tiers that we have, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas. And I didn't want to touch that subject because you would require another podcast on that.
Another 10 probably.
Yeah. And that again we'll be visiting, depending on how you view it, your understanding will change.
Got it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But Varna can also mean the skill sets which are determined by our gunas, right? Some are more inclined, as I said, to dancing. Some are more inclined to be bankers. Some are more inclined who, are good sales people. And that's because of the nature. That's because of maybe we grew up in a family that did that.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. So for someone who's listening who teaches asana classes and studies a little bit of yoga, how does all of this relate to yoga? And it's like, it's a big question.
It is. Well, first of all, we have 6 darshanas, right? Mm-hmm. And each darshana has its own system, methodology, own terminology when it comes to teaching.
Okay.
Now, for example, if I pick up Sankhya, then it's always good for me to stay within that Sankhya tradition, right? Because the terminology, Sanskrit terms will also vary and the context with which we use it will vary. If I decide to take up yoga, then my terminology or the books that I would be using to understand the process will also vary. But what's happening is that, as if I may say, Induji used the word khichdi. When we jump from one philosophy to the next without establishing ourselves in one, it will become a khichdi of a yoga practice. And so we will lose all sense of context. We will lose what the terms actually mean. And more importantly, that methodology of teaching or learning the steps will be misaligned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, we are at a state where we're trying to learn everything. So one day we'll take a workshop of a Bhagavad Gita class. The next day we'll take a workshop of the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. The two are different.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. And in the way one is more internal and the other one is more external. So you're going to get confused. And you cannot mix the two together, although the end result is maybe same, but you can't mix the two teaching methodologies together.
Mm-hmm. It's also the speed learning, right, that we try to do in the yoga world. We learn something. It's more about information. It's not about assimilation and making it knowledge and trying to really understand the wisdom of it. It's just about information and just be the next thing and the next thing and just amassing information for I don't know what. So
you'll notice I've seen people will take a course, incorporate that when they decide to teach. So a student will go get a course, learn it, and then after about 2-3 months will teach it. And when there's no time, as you say, to assimilate and understand and ask yourself, really, am I at that point where I can really teach this? So I stopped teaching. It's going to be a year just so that I can.
Mm-hmm. I remember that. Mm-hmm.
So I can go into studying. And till today, I tell myself, I don't think I'm ready yet to teach this vast knowledge that we have because I need time to assimilate, to digest it, explore it for myself, and then ask, do I feel in alignment with this method or do I need to search a different method? Whereas here we're finding people are learning and then the next thing they're offering it to somebody else.
Absolutely. It's also sometimes, right, Savira, I feel like it's more than they learn it to teach it. They don't learn it to live it.
Yeah.
Right. And that whole embodiment of yoga is gone. And sometimes I've also noticed that people will pick up a text only with the intention of, okay, what can I pluck from here to sell it in my course? Like sometimes people will just say, oh, abhyasa and vairagya for every little thing. And no, and it's true. Like I've been in those conversations and sometimes it's better to not say anything than to say something. But just like you can't just pluck vairagya and abhyasa and then just keep giving it as advice to yoga teachers. And where's the contextualization of it? Where's your vairagya? Where's your abhyasa? But yeah, no, I hear you, and I think it's a problem. So that kind of brings me to my next question. What has the world misunderstood about Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma? And I'm going to sneak in a second small question here. Should we refer to it as Hinduism? Should we refer to it as Sanatana Dharma? Or does it not matter?
No, it does matter. It is actually Sanatana Dharma.
Okay.
And it was there dated, if I'm not mistaken, also found in the Vedas. So it is Sanatana Dharma. Because these are eternal, these actions, these duties are eternal.
Eternal.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And our teachings and our knowledge is eternal, right? So Hinduism is, I would say, more modern. Sanatana Dharma is the correct term.
Got it. Okay.
What has the yoga world? They've misunderstood it to be, first of all, religious in nature. It's not. But again, some may find it religious and some may not. So it just depends on whom you're talking to. Also, because we have so many philosophies, we don't have one particular authority book. So many view it from an Abrahamic lens. We don't have our belief is not just in one God. Our belief is in Brahman, right? Universe.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So how we approach it are many ways, either through the Sankhya philosophy or the Vedanta philosophy or through yoga philosophy. So for here, context will matter. So for example, Vedanta, we use the word Brahman and Maya. So all the teachings will relate to Brahman and Maya. Whereas in Sankhya philosophy, the context will be Purusha and Prakriti. So everything will be related to Purusha and Prakriti. So that is important to really understand the two differences in the philosophy and to choose one or the other. So we don't have a central doctrine per se. It's complex. I, as a Hindu, find it complex. So you can imagine what others...
Me too. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Even in like these conversations, right? In trainings and workshops, and where people are trying to understand, is yoga religious and how is Hinduism a part of this? And all the Hindus in the room, each one of us will have a different answer and a different opinion. Because we are so different. It happened a few weeks ago in training. And I was trying to give them that context of, it's so different for each one of us. It's really hard to answer this in like a 5-minute context. It's not even possible.
It's like it's like namaste, right? Some people, some people say it's only a greeting, whereas for others, it's more. I've seen it used in so many ways that it's not just a greeting. So you'll always find mixed views, perspectives, opinions, thoughts on it. But it doesn't mean that it is only meant as a hello or a bye-bye, as some would like to say it. So again, discernment, use it if you connect with it, use it within context. If you don't feel aligned to use it, don't use it. If you do use it, the tendency is that people start to pick and choose and say, no, what you're doing is wrong. And that shouldn't be the case. We don't do it ourselves amongst each other. So why should it happen with those who are practicing or teaching yoga in Western yoga land?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So true. So for the listeners, right, Savira, if they want to, say, understand more about Sanatana Dharma, because it is so vast and like you were saying before we started recording, just so many, just if you go on Google and try to find something, it's just so much. Do you have any advice for listeners who will want to learn more about Sanatana Dharma? How do they navigate just this sea of information? Prasad often jokes and says things like, go ask your best friend Google and then see if she helps you or not. So how do they navigate this sea of information? Because you and I know this, right? Like checking your source, verifying your source is so important. Or do you just have resources or recommendations that people can go to?
Well, I would say there's one book that I quite like. It's by Nitin Sridhar. It's called Sanatana Dharma. It's a small book, and you'll also find a little bit about Sanatana Dharma and the various dharma in there. That's a good question. I would also suggest talk to people. Get different opinions, get different views, do the research. Here's the thing, that we're so
spoon-fed.
Exactly. I was going to say, we're so inclined. We want everything to be given to us.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to do the work.
Yes, so true. Mm-hmm.
Do the work, figure it out, find out. And when in doubt, then I would say, go to teachers who are established in one of these philosophies, like Sankhya philosophy, Vedanta philosophy. Talk to them. We have a tendency in Western yoga to push aside traditional teachers.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And they are a reservoir of right knowledge or correct knowledge, information. And it's important to gravitate towards them, to move towards them, to listen to them. Part of deepening our practice is Shruti, is listening. If we only listen to one particular voice or type of teachers
or narrative.
Exactly. We're limiting our own progress to expand.
And we're making ourselves intolerant.
Exactly. We don't have the ability to accept another opinion. And the funny thing in life, there's always two sides to everything. You know, a coin has two sides. Can you pick one or the other? No, the whole coin comes as one.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, and these are things that are missing. So we talk about the abstract so much that we've forgotten to break it down into something a little more concrete that we can understand and relate to. Having that experience is what's missing in our practice.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Mm-hmm. I feel like also something that is slightly lost or just not spoken about is just the timeless nature of this knowledge, right? Especially, and I see this on the social media world, and I'm sure you do too, that if you see teachers who are making it very time bound to something that is current or trending and not necessarily eternal, to me, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
If that's the only thing that people are doing, right? And it's always about that timelessness, that eternal quality, that nature of this wisdom is what teachers should be sharing, not necessarily just slapping it onto anything and everything. So yeah, I just feel like that's something that's visible and something that you can identify.
So I have a quote for you. It's funny you mentioned that. I found this quote to be it's powerful and impactful. So it says, a man who has no faith in his own Atma cannot have faith in Brahman. And a man who has no faith in Brahman cannot have faith in humanity.
Oh, wow. Do you know who it is by?
It's by Nallusamy.
Nallusamy. Okay, that's wonderful. I'll add that in the show notes. It's a beautiful one.
So that is Sanatana Dharma. Our belief in Brahman, our belief in Atma, and how we can approach Brahman through living a fulfilled life by following our individual, community, stage of life or skill set, our dharma, to be on the right side or in order to work towards the greater dharma.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Can I ask you one final question as we wrap this up? And it's going to be slightly of an intense question. Okay. So listening to all that you have shared, is yoga a religious practice?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Okay. I just want to circle back to it because for the listeners more so, right? It might be on their minds.
No, not at all. And I say that, look, I come from an Arya Samaj community, right? Or that was my upbringing. And we didn't believe in deities or following certain rituals. Ours was more in line with Dharma and with the bigger understanding of Om and the universe. And there's nothing religious about it. It's the way we live our life in alignment with our universe.
Wonderful.
I mean, we see it here, right? If we pollute our earth, what's going to happen, right? Everything will go off balance. So there's nothing religious when we practice yoga and learn to discern and learn to have clarification or to have that clear thought in our actions. There's nothing religious about that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for clarifying that. I just want to make sure the listeners hear it in this conversation.
True. But I will also say, Arundhati, there are some people who may look at it as religious because of the rituals that they do in their own practice. So again, do the legwork, do the homework, figure out the answer or find the answer and see if you can come to your own opinion about it and how does it relate to you as an individual and depending on where your faith is or where you come from or what your background is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. This has been really insightful. Okay. It's rich and it's you've laid out a very complex topic and in a very structured and relatable manner. And it is an intimidating topic. Like I was intimidated to have this conversation on the podcast, and which is why I was like, if I ask Savira, it'll be relatable. And hopefully the listeners will be able to get a little more clarity about Sanatana Dharma from this conversation. As always, I will link to all your previous episodes on the podcast. I think you're like the front runner in the number of guests. Like you've come back the most number of times, and I'm sure it's not the last one. So I will link to where people can connect with you. I will link to your recent articles, your blogs, and everything else. Thank you so much, Savira.
Thank you so much, Arundhati. I really appreciate it. In fact, I will say that your questions really make me work for the answers.
But I have the easier job. I always say that to the guests. I have the easier job. The one who's answering the questions has to do way more work than I do.
But I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the very end of this topic. Once again, you can find everything that's mentioned on the show at letstalk.yoga/listen for our show notes. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please remember to rate and review this podcast so it helps other yoga students and teachers like you to discover this content more easily. It'll only take a minute, but it makes a world of difference for content creators like me. Okay? It helps us to keep putting out this free content, and it would just be deeply appreciated. If you are looking for details about the Teaching Yoga course that is happening this June, then make sure you go to mindfulyogateachers.com/beginnersytt. I will see you next week with a new conversation, a new guest. Until then, enjoy your practice.